they confirmed, or they said that a missile, or what they described as a missile, hit a neighbor.
Unfortunately, we've lost that call, but we will reconnect with Magda as soon as we can. But for now, we go live to Cairo, where Heather Murdock for the Voice of America is standing by. Heather, thank you so much for speaking with us on Network Africa.
Hi, thank you.
Now, we do understand that Amnesty International has confirmed that civilians were also the victims of the targets carried out by the Egyptian government. But what I'd like to ask you, since you're on ground in Cairo, is if Egypt could actually offer help in carrying out a ground offensive so as to minimize this kind of situation from occurring, minimize the number of civilian casualties.
Well, some analysts say that Egypt does have the military capability, and actually I think most analysts would agree that Egypt has a huge military capability. But at this time, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the president, is not calling for any invasion into Libya. If you remember, he did call for an invasion, an international invasion last week, then he backed down, saying he wanted to lift the arms embargo instead. But in his most recent statements, he said, in fact, Egypt is not and doesn't plan to invade Libya. But the operation was a revenge operation. That being said, they did send in airstrikes to Libya, so and that's not the most precise way of attacking someone, because simply the pilots can't see who's in the buildings, what's on the ground. Even if they have planned carefully to hit only military targets, there are often civilian casualties along with this. But sending in ground troops, while it might be a more precise way to fight, is very problematic, because first of all, it would be hard to get the support of the Egyptian people, and second of all, Libya is also a very complicated conflict with several militant groups in two competing governments, as well as the Islamic State fighting each other. So adding another element of a group of soldiers might just further complicate and embroil the war.
But is there any other way around this besides a ground offensive? Is there any other kind of support that the Egyptian government could lend in the fight against the Islamic State?
Well, what the Libyan government is asking for is support with weapons. That's the main thing they say. They say they are overwhelmed by the Islamic State because they are outgunned, basically. So Egypt could supply weapons. It does require, at the moment, for the United Nations to approve any sale of weapons to Libya because of an arms embargo that's been in place since 2011. And that's one thing that they're debating right now.
Now, we also know for certain that President al-Sisi addressed Egypt during the weekend, I believe on Sunday, trying to reassure the Egyptian people of their safety despite these challenging times. What's the atmosphere at the moment? Are people confident in the president's words?
Well, his reaction in Libya, I think, is well regarded. The people of Egypt were horrified by the killing of 21 Coptic Christian workers in Libya and did want to see action taken. But I think people in Egypt are also deeply concerned about the conflict in Libya being their neighbor, also not just their neighbor, but an economic partner on a really ground level, where some estimate as many as 3 million Egyptian workers actually make a living in Libya, sending their money home. But what is, I think, more on people's minds is the prospect of Islamist militias growing stronger in Egypt itself, either the war spilling over into Egypt or militias that are already here fighting government interests growing stronger. So that's a big concern. And the Egyptian government has been very clear in its commitment to fighting Islamist militants, but it's very complicated in Egypt because political Islam and extremist militants exist side by side and sometimes complicate the issue, making people further afraid that extremist militants will not just endanger their victims, but endanger more moderate Islamist people.
Heather Murdock for the Voice of America in Cairo. Thank you so much for speaking with us on Network Africa. We really appreciate your time and your input.
Thank you.
Now we can now go back to Magda, who is who is a Libya researcher for Amnesty International via telephone. Magda, thank you so much for staying on the line.
Thank you.
Now, could you carry on? You were telling us about the evidence that Amnesty International has to confirm that civilian casualties were also victims of the Egyptian air offensive.
Yes, I mean, what I was saying is that, you know, according to residents of Derna, there have been a number of military targets that have been hit. However, the last strike was directed at a residential neighborhood, which was located near the Derna hospital, and was carried out without prior warning on a house and on a street, on a narrow street inside a neighborhood, where residents, eyewitnesses, and families of victims have said that they did not see any military targets. So, you know, the Libyan authorities have stated, the Libyan authorities or the Libyan Air Force affiliated to the UN-recognized government of Libya have stated that there was a vehicle with a mounted anti-aircraft weapon there, or that it was mounted on one of the roofs. This is not the evidence we found. People have told us that there were some men watching and filming the airstrikes from rooftops of the houses in the neighborhood. They said that they could hear the sound of anti-aircraft retaliating against the Egyptian fighter jets, but from a distance, and in their vicinity, in the area where the target was hit, there was no military objective. Now, basically now the onus is on the Egyptian authorities to investigate this incident. It appears from the research that we have found and the evidence that we found that it may be disproportionate, in which case it is a violation of international humanitarian law. However, this is an incident that must be investigated.
Well, unfortunately, we do seem to be having trouble speaking with Magda, but we will try to reconnect with her again. But just before we go on a break, we need to tell you about moves that are being made by countries like Tunisia. Now, as countries continue to collaborate in the fight against the Islamic State, Tunisia has made a total of 100 arrests of suspected Islamist militants in the last 3 days, some of whom are said to be or were said to be preparing attacks, and also published video footage showing evidence of an Islamic State influence on some of those detained. Tunisia is waging a campaign against hardline Islamist groups who emerged in the country during its transition to democracy after the 2011 uprising against autocrat Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali. Now, news of the arrests comes a week after 4 Tunisian policemen were killed by militants in the central region of Kasserine, close to the Algerian border. Islamic State has already expanded its presence in Libya, where it has exploited the absence of law and authority as rival militias battle it out, and there are fears that it's seeking to expand its activities in the rest of North Africa. And now, in addition, Tunisia has been a major source of Islamist fighters traveling to Syria since 2011. Among the Islamist militant groups to have emerged after the 2011 uprising is Ansar al-Sharia, which is listed as a terrorist organization by the United States and European officials. We'll take a break now on Network Africa. When we come back, we'll try to speak to Magda again, but we'll also be looking at Kenya's High Court, which has thrown out key aspects of a tough new anti-terrorism law. We'll have details for you in a moment. Please stay with us.